Welcome to this edition of the Committee on the Present Danger China's webinar series focused on unrestricted warfare that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has been waging against the United States of America for decades. Almost totally unknown to the American people and with tremendously detrimental effects on our economy, on our society, on our political system and cohesion, and ultimately on the viability of our constitutional republic. We are going to be focused today on what is arguably the most dangerous of all of the lines of attack that the Chinese Communist Party has either already perpetrated against our country or has put itself in a position to perpetrate. The proposition before us is, has Xi Jinping, the communist emperor of China, put into place capabilities that would enable his regime to inflict incalculable, indeed mortal harm on, well, not just our country, but on its population through the use on a scale we've not yet comprehended, let alone experienced, designed to decimate the population using biological warfare techniques. We've had a taste of that, of course, with COVID-19 from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a preeminent biowarfare laboratory, part of the complex of such laboratories and design bureaus and research institutions that make up the illegal, offensive biological warfare program of the CCP. COVID-19, it was called. It killed over 1 million Americans and countless others around the world. And it was not only designed as a biological weapon, it was unleashed in a deliberate biowarfare attack. The committee's Team B3, several years ago now, published a book that propounded that proposition as a kind of second opinion on what was at the time the official line of the Biden administration, which was that they just couldn't really figure it out, what happened, whence this virus came, and how it proved to be so devastating. Our team looked at the facts and concluded that based on the available evidence, which is not as complete as we would like, it couldn't be ascertained how the COVID-19 weapon was unleashed from the laboratory. But what was absolutely clear was that once it was unleashed, the Chinese regime made a deliberate decision to inflict it upon not only this country, but nations around the world. This is the backdrop to what has been happening in the years since, and we're going to discuss those at some length with an absolutely stellar cast of subject matter experts, analysts, and a journalist that has just recently made a world-class documentary on the subject of the Chinese biological warfare program. It's called China's Civilization Killers, and we'll come to that in a moment. But before we do, we often start these webinars with a threat assessment by one of our most distinguished intelligence veterans. In this case, it is Charles Sam Faddis, an individual who has served his country with distinction in several capacities, notably as an Army officer, also as an assistant attorney general in Washington State, but not least as an undercover operative of the CIA for 2 decades, who capped his career at the agency being responsible at Langley, the headquarters for weapons of mass destruction terrorism. He knows a lot about biological warfare, which has been widely described as the poor man's thermonuclear weapon. And I'd hoped that we would have Sam with us. He is out of the country at the moment. So I'm going to do something a little unusual, a dramatic reading of an essay that Sam published recently in And Magazine. Uh, it's available at andmagazine.substack.com. And it is a tremendous resource for all of us, and I commend to you subscribing to its products. The headline is Better Late Than Never. How many secret Chinese biolabs are there in this country? And it reads as follows. Back in 2023, the FBI essentially stumbled onto an illegal and secret biolab in California run by a Chinese national. That lab was jammed with all sorts of dangerous organisms, including COVID-19, HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, chlamydia, E. coli, and herpes, and just happened to be in proximity to one of our key military air bases. At the time, we at And Magazine asked repeatedly if anyone had any intention of investigating the possibility of of there being other such secret biolabs scattered around the country. Apparently, nobody cared. After all, the Chinese Communist Party had, in one way or another, funneled massive amounts of cash to the Bidens, so investigating illicit Chinese activities on our soil probably was not a politically wise move at the FBI. Biden is gone. Trump is in office. Local police in Las Vegas just stumbled onto another illicit biolab connected to the same Chinese citizen, Jia Beizhu, behind the first lab. The FBI is involved, and suddenly they seem seized with the issue. Press reports indicate they are investigating 20 other locations connected to the same person. Inside a home in Las Vegas, the FBI found a plethora of glass vials. The vials contained blood, tissue, bodily fluid samples, and other unlabeled fluids. There were also containers labeled with names like dengue fever, HIV, and malaria. The LLC that owns the property is the same one connected to the California case. Samples from the Las Vegas home have been shipped to the FBI's specialized laboratories to determine the exact nature of the unknown liquids and pathogens discovered. On February 1st, 2026, authorities arrested Ori Solomon, 55, who was identified as the property manager for the Las Vegas residence. Solomon has been booked into the Clark County Detention Center on a felony charge of improperly disposing of hazardous waste. The mind boggles. 3 years after we discovered a secret Chinese biolab on our soil, we must now accept that we have no idea how many other such facilities are inside the country. This is particularly hard to comprehend given that after the first lab was discovered in 2023, Congress conducted a lengthy investigation and issued some extremely hard-hitting findings, including the following. The illegal biolab was run by a PRC citizen who is a wanted fugitive from Canada with a $330 million Canadian dollar judgment against him for stealing American intellectual property. This PRC citizen was a top official at a PRC state-controlled company and had links to military-civil fusion entities. The illegal biolab received millions of dollars in unexplained payments from PRC banks while running the illegal biolab. The illegal biolab contained thousands of samples of labeled, unlabeled, and encoded potential pathogens, including HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, and COVID. The illegal biolab also contained a freezer labeled Ebola, which contained unlabeled, sealed silver bags consistent with how the lab stored high-risk biological materials. Ebola is a select agent with a lethality rate between 25 and 90%. The biolab contained nearly 1,000 transgenic mice, genetically engineered to mimic the human immune system. Lab workers said that the mice were designed to, quote, catch and carry COVID-19 virus, unquote. After local officials who discovered the lab sought help from the CDC and others, the CDC refused to test any of the samples. The mice in question are specially bred. They are expensive. They are genetically modified to simulate human immune systems. Workers helping local law enforcement in processing the material found at the first lab became sick after tending to the infected mice. The lab was located across from a residential area near a high school and a water supply, the report from the Congress notes. There is a reason why biological weapons are referred to as the poor man's nuclear weapon. They are cheap, they are relatively easy to manufacture in a small space. A lab in a suburban home could grow enough of a pathogen for a nationwide attack. Everyone in America remembers COVID. With all respect to those who died, in the scheme of things, that was nothing. There are any number of biological agents that, if properly deployed, could kill 60 to 70% of those infected. You could buy the equipment you would need to grow these monsters from any online lab equipment site. Likewise, the Chinese interest in biological weapons is well known. There is no question they are working on them and that in the right situation, they would use them. What should have happened in 2023 is that we turned the country upside down looking for anyone and anything remotely connected in any way to the first lab we found. Apparently, what did happen was nothing. We wrote it off, went back to sleep, and pretended we were safe. That kind of complacency gets you dead. This might be a really good time to find out just how many other secret Chinese biolabs there are in this country. That's the end of Sam Faddis's contribution to this program. I commend to you again his collected works at endmagazine.substack.com. We're going to hear next from a man who I believe has probably a better fix on what the Chinese are up to than anybody in this country. His name is Dr. Zhijiao Sean Lin. He is a PhD, a biochemist, a man who has served as an Army officer at Fort Detrick, the facility where the Army works on defending against biological weapons attack. He also has the distinction of having survived the Tiananmen Square massacre. These days, he is, I believe this is correct, the executive director of the Global Alliance Against Communist Disinformation and Propaganda. Sean Lin is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China and one of our duty experts on all of these matters, and we're delighted to have him with us. Sean, thank you so much for joining us on extremely short notice. Please give us your sense of both what Sam has just reported as well as where we are with respect to these biolabs and the Chinese Communist Party's possible intentions going forward.
Thank you very much for inviting me. The situation that the Las Vegas lab, Las Vegas illegal lab was identified definitely brings another serious alarm. And it's clearly indicating that our investigation and as well as the judicial process regarding about the Reedy case in California, it was very delayed, very not efficient at all. And the report that I saw actually indicating that the criminal Zhu Jiabei, even though he was already in U.S. custody, and by the end of the 2023, but he's still able to communicate and direct it, Ori Solomon, the guy in Las Vegas, to transfer some of the biomaterials from California to the Las Vegas lab. It's a garage style. So I think these person did not show any remorse, any repentance of what he did in the United States, even though he was investigated, even though he was supposed to be on trial on April this year. But I don't see any repentance on what he's done. And I think this indicating there must be a bigger scheme, bigger plan behind what he's doing. So when he escaped from Canada, enter United States, this is already a very weird thing, because if he was actually charged by the Canadian government and then actually had about 330 million Canadian dollars judgment against him, most of the Chinese people who under this kind of situation will escape directly back to China, not enter the United States. But he actually successful using another alias, another pseudonym to come into the United States, and then he were able to obtain another identity, another documents to use alien name like David He. So in this way, he was able to set up different companies, like a network of companies that he can run in the United States. So these indicating there's a lot of loophole in this process, including the border security, including identify the identity fraud, as well as he were able to receive large amount of money from China, and so he's received more than 1.3 million from China in the last few years. So definitely, there's also a money laundering involved. So there are many processes he could be identified, but there are so many loopholes that he was able to take advantage, and then he escaped the scrutiny. And then he definitely took advantage of the loophole in management of biomaterials, including the dangerous pathogen. So nowadays in the United States, even these kind of shell company that he established, he can purchase pathogens from accredited labs, even from federal agencies, without any vetting in this process. Nobody will check the legitimacy of the purchasers. So this is really a big loophole. And because it's a private lab and there's no federal funding involved, so federal government has no monitoring into this kind of transaction, and so cannot check where the reagents, where the biomaterial end up with, and what purpose, and what kind of research or what kind of manipulation, what kind of engineering that he could do on these pathogens. So I think this is a big problem. And even though the California case has been identified more than 3 years, but there's no legislation efforts to tighten up this process, to have better scrutiny. And so I think this is really a big problem. So now I think it's just a second case to, it's kind of sad to see that you have to wait for local people. Some people really get sick, and then provide additional clue to the FBI so that another discovery can be undertaken. So this is a really dangerous situation. And as you has mentioned, there are maybe more than 20 other locations that these Zhuja Bei also operated, or indirectly. Sometimes he use different names. He can say he just a representative, a special representative for that particular company, but actually he's the owner. So he find different way to cover up his ownership for these share companies. And so what's the purpose for all these? So I think definitely there's a clear directive from probably from Chinese government to let him set up such a large company. It's not just for profit, and the location that he choose, as well the way that he acquires so many different pathogens. More than 20 different pathogens has been identified in the Reedy lab in California. So he's not just simply doing something for like creating some fake diagnostic testing kits. I think he has some intentional purpose to collect different pathogens, as well as different type of humanized transgenic mice. So there must be some higher directive that he need to do these in a large scale, and he's collecting it. And even though he was indicted, he still tried to save what he collected and transfer those items from California to Las Vegas. So there are definitely, I think, more ulterior motive involved, but nobody really tracking on that. And I think the current indictment on him is not involved into that. And so that's a big problem. And he also hired a accountant who has clear connection with the United Front work department of the CCP. And that person actually even setting up little red classrooms in the state of Nevada. So definitely clearly involved in the CCP's brainwashing, information warfare as well. So these criminals, Zhu Jiabei, clearly had connection with CCP's military civil fusion program, connection with the CCP's government agencies. And when he was in China in early 2000, he ran a state-owned company. It's called Hunan Pioneer Aide Biological Engineering Company. Yeah, so from the beginning, almost 20 years ago, he was already involved in bioengineering jobs. And then he later on moved to Canada, and he still continued on this track. And now he claims he's running some diagnostic companies in China, in Qingdao, in a scientific park. But now in US, he still do many of these probably secret operations in the name of biological or biotech companies. So in this way, he can avoid a lot of scrutinies, and probably many Chinese government is taking advantage of the so-called scientific collaboration between Chinese scholars and the U.S. researchers, so that they can exchange biomaterials or doing some joint research, even apply U.S. federal fundings. And in this way, Chinese researchers not only able to steal the intellectual properties, but also can transfer material to China, and sometimes shipping dangerous materials or bring in the dangerous pathogen materials into United States, like those cases in University of Michigan. Right? So I think basically Chinese government have a long time efforts in the biological warfare against the United States, and we are not knowing the scale and the different tools that they are actively using. So this is a big problem, and we, United States government, definitely need to step up the process to monitor this. And a lot of times, I think the hindrance is actually come from the different government agency, from the experts in the government, in the scientific community, because most people who look at the material, they will think, this is still far away from biological weapons. And CDC experts say, let's just destroy the samples. Why waste the time to testing out what kind of pathogen was involved? And many people don't believe the Chinese government is taking actions against U.S. populations through biological warfare. Many of the scientific community do not believe that, whether it's Chinese overseas scholars as well as the U.S. Scholars, scientists, and researchers. Many people don't believe that. I think this is one of the biggest obstacles that prevent United States government taking further actions on these issues.
John Lin, thank you. Very important context and background on the nature of the program that the Chinese are illegally operating and the threat that it represents to us, especially in the form of these biolabs. And we're going to talk with another of our intelligence veterans about some of the specific implications of what we've discovered to date with respect to these labs. The individual who will be addressing us, as he often does on these programs, for which I'm very grateful, is retired Navy Captain James Fennell. He served in his last duty station in the Navy as the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He has been a very astute observer and critic of what the Chinese have been up to, especially in their military operations. And in the course of an hour-long conversation that I had with him, which was fascinating, on our program Securing America, heard and seen on Real America's Voice, as well as podcasts, was very troubling, to say the least, and part of the information that we are anxious to share with you all. Jim Fennell is a senior fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy. He is also a co-author with Dr. Bradley Thayer of an important book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. And this business of collaborating with or turning a blind eye towards, at a minimum, the Chinese biological weapons program is a prime example of that perfidious behavior by altogether too many Americans. Let's go to the videotape of an excerpt of my conversation with Captain Fennell at this point. There's a lot of talk at the moment, as you know, about ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement team that is trying to remove illegal aliens, the worst of the worst, we're told. My view of this is that if you're really serious about the worst of the worst, you've got to be thinking about and taking action against what, by some estimates, are tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers that were brought into this country illegally, thanks to Joe Biden's open borders. And this is made all the more dangerous. This worst of the worst, truly worst of the worst threat is by virtue of something that our colleague Sam Faddis has called attention to, as have you, namely that we found another biological warfare laboratory, like the one in Reedley, California, down the road from a key naval installation up there, now in Las Vegas. And there are reports that there's suspected that there may be as many as 20 other of these labs scattered around the country, something specifically warned about by the Select Committee on China in the United States House of Representatives. Jim, I guess my concern is severalfold. One is that's a formula for utter disaster. If those soldiers marry up with the vials of deadly pathogens that Sam says could kill 60 to 90% of those exposed to them. And on top of it, we don't seem to be prioritizing the, detection, let alone the removal and neutralization of these soldiers. Give us quickly 2 minutes your thoughts.
Yeah, Frank, when we exposed, or we didn't expose, but when we talked about the Reedley in the San Joaquin Valley near Fresno biolab that was found 2 years ago, I mean, it was a big deal for me because I had served at Naval Air Station Lemoore, which is the master jet base of the U.S. Pacific Fleet's West Coast F-A-18 Hornets and their carrier air wing staffs. And I'd lived there, worked there. And that place is less than 30 miles away that they found this. Now we find out that there's another biolab in Las Vegas near Nellis Air Force Base, within 20 miles of Nellis Air Force Base. If there's another 20 around or more, where are they? And somebody needs to start doing their intelligence work and start mapping these locations out to see if they're next to our military installations. And if we find another one that's even close in the 20-mile radius of a military installation, then we have a problem. We have a problem, but it will be undeniable. This should be the top story in the country today. But my fear is that what's going to happen is that there are going to be whisperers, China whisperers, that are going to come to President Trump in the dark of the night or in tweets or whatever, and they're going to tell him, don't worry about this, Mr. President. This is something that's been created to disrupt your economic deal that you're going to try to cement with Xi when you go in April to Beijing. And so he's going to be told that this is all something about nothing, and it's just a bunch of, far-right people trying to stir up things to get back at China because they're the China super hawks and they don't like China. And if I could tell the president anything right now, I'd say, sir, you cannot doubt what China says they want to do. Read Unrestricted Warfare, understand their intense hatred of us.
Yeah, and not least their plan, according to Deng Xiaoping, to use bioweapons to depopulate the United States so it could be colonized by China. That is a topic to which we will return in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to get another angle on the vexing problem that we face with this biological warfare threat. I had a conversation with Dr. Robert Malone on our program, Securing America, earlier this week, and shared with him some insights into all of this that I gleaned from my time working in the Reagan Pentagon a lifetime ago, and drew him out a bit on the possibilities that uh, arms control, um, something perhaps improving upon the existing biological weapons convention, which prohibits universally the kind of offensive biological warfare program that the Chinese Communist Party, among others, obviously have in very high gear. Um, Dr. Malone knows a lot about such technologies. He has worked in the national security space for many years. He's been a pioneer in patent earning breakthroughs in, among other things, mRNA technology, pharmaceutical research, and the possibilities of having to contend with bio warfare, which seems, again, the more imminent by the day. Let's go to the video of my conversation with Dr. Robert Malone. I wanted to start, if I may, by just sharing an anecdote from my time in the Reagan administration. I was a young Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the time, and I received a briefing from a specialist in the Defense Intelligence Agency. He came to my office to tell me about the problem of biological warfare. And one of the things he said, I will never forget it. He looked around the small office and he pointed at the closet in the corner. And he said, you could have a biological warfare manufacturing facility inside that closet and nobody walking in the hall, let alone outside the building, would know it's there. Point being that verification, or even simply monitoring what can be done with various processes to produce lethal biological agents, is a profound problem, and I don't think it's gotten a lot easier with the passage of time. In fact, to the contrary, it seems some efforts are working very much at cross purposes with that. Now, we'll talk about that in a moment with the World Health Organization's new pandemic treaty. But level set with us first, if you would, about, is it correct to say that biological warfare, the poor man's thermonuclear weapons, is how they've been described in the past, are now proliferating around the world and becoming more dangerous by the day?
Frank, that's absolutely true. And the technology necessary and the intellectual firepower necessary to create weaponized biologic agents is almost trivial. You can get the necessary equipment off of eBay, consequent to various sales from NIH used equipment or academics, et cetera, et cetera. It's easy to get the necessary hardware. Matter of fact, when I used to work up in Frederick for Dynamport Vaccine Company, there were guys there that had acquired really sophisticated biofermentation technology and equipment on sale at, 10 cents a dollar that they were using to brew beer. It's that simple to get it, and it's that expensive. And just to underscore your point, Frank, within the biowarfare community, or whatever we want to call it now, let's call it biodefense, it's kind of been rebranded. One of the stories is that the real reasons that the Russians came to the table and the Berlin Wall eventually went down was that we neutralized the threat of T-72 blitzkrieg to the English Channel. How did we do that? With neutron bombs? No. We did it with a binary biologic weapon that was actually field tested in parts of Alaska. And it involved a simple toxin plus a bacteria. I won't disclose what those were. That's classified information. But it could be readily produced in any garage in any place in the world, or, some facsimile of a garage, any closed building, and using simple equipment. The agent was so potent that, unlike neutron bombs, it would completely wipe out tank crews within a very short period of time, as opposed to with the neutron bomb, apparently they survived for long enough that they could still make it to the channel, or so that was the scenario. And I was talking to a friend from Romania that remembers back in those days and the propaganda coming out of the Soviet Union. The other day, he was here in D.C., and he said that he remembers how the Soviet Union propaganda had been so pervasive in Romania that they had the capabilities to counter anything that NATO might wish to deploy on them, and they had all these tank capabilities. And then suddenly all that propaganda stopped. That seemed to coincide with about when it became clear that there was this binary weapon. It is a major risk, but now it's much broader than that. And that's the key point with the new thrust vector for updating the Biologics Weapons Convention, is that it's built back from your era that you're referring to, the Reagan era. It's built on the thesis that the threat actors are basically nation states. And that is an obsolete concept, just as the thesis that all biologic weapons are this kind of warfare-bent technology. A lot of the biologic threats that we face right now are from things like gene drive technology and, of course, our favorite over the last 5 years, gain-of-function research.
I want to come back to that, Robert, but just staying with the Biological Warfare Convention for a moment, the problem with trying to use arms control to contend with this threat has been understood for decades to be that you can't verify what is going on, as I said from that story.
And the convention intentionally has no verification capacity.
They just said, forget about it. We're just going to assert that this control will be in place, and we give up on verification.
It's like magical thinking. Well, what it was a kind of a Band-Aid placed over a gaping wound. And everybody agreed that we're just going to ignore the fact that the patient is hemorrhaging. The logic here is that to put in place any kind of verification would compromise sovereignty.
Well, intelligence and security as well, indeed. And that was not going to be contemplated by some of these characters. And in fact, they didn't pay any attention to the restrictions on the offensive biowarfare piece. Dr. Robert Malone, thank you. As always, your expertise and insights on this particular problem set are deeply appreciated. We're going to turn finally to a kind of threefer, I guess I'd call it. We have with us Joshua Phillip, who has produced a new documentary, as I mentioned earlier. It's entitled China's Civilization Killers. I wanted to run just as a sort of sneak preview, I guess. It's out, it's available now from Epoch Times. I wanted to take advantage of the very powerful trailer that is in circulation now, because among other things, it features some comments from a man that I think we all regard as one of the great heroes in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party. Few do a better job than Gordon G. Chang in raising the alarm about what it's up to and the extent to which that unrestricted warfare and elite capture and the military buildup and the predations against the people of China all add up to a mortal peril to our country. So let's go to the trailer for this China's Civilization Killers featuring our friend Gordon Chang, and then we'll hear from Josh Phillip on the other side.
This could end up leaving China as the world's only viable civilization.
What is the state of the Chinese Communist Party's biological warfare programs?
And one that concerns me the most is their program to develop pathogens to attack specific ethnic groups. And that's why I talk about a civilization killer, because all non-Chinese would be either sickened or killed by this. Remember, China has been collecting DNA profiles of foreigners. The largest collection of DNA profiles of Americans, for instance, is not in America, it's in China. We should be concerned about the DNA profile of every American, because China can develop diseases that will hobble our society.
That powerful trailer and very important source of information. We're always delighted that Epoch Times is live streaming these programs, and the work that it does with Josh Phillips and Jan Jekielek and others on their team is simply superb. And this film, which I confess I have not had a chance to see more of than the trailer, is going to make, I hope, a very important contribution to this particular topic of what is it that the Chinese Communist Party is up to with respect to bioweapons, and what would it mean for all of us? Josh Phillips is the senior investigative reporter and host of Crossroads at Epoch Times, an award-winning journalist many times over, and a documentary filmmaker, including most recently this film, China's Civilization Killers. Josh, thank you for dropping everything, I think, on very short notice to join us, and for this film, and for your really tireless reporting on the menace we face from communist China, and I believe the imperative of being done with the regime that is making all of this possible. I think it's the only hope, personally, for avoiding disaster here. But I'm very anxious to get your thoughts on all of this.
The interview you saw, the China's Civilization Killers, was that's specifically an interview with Gordon Chang. And I mean, in it, he notes that China has been gathering up DNA biometric data on Americans. We even find out some of the COVID test kits were being processed in Chinese laboratories. So they were getting American DNA data even from COVID test kits. We found out, for example, that some of the test things you can use to find out your ancestry. I don't know which companies in particular, but a lot of them were actually sending your DNA to China for processing. It's actually why the U.S. military was advised to not do those types of ancestry type tests. The CCP has been stealing information on medical data on Americans, and the concern is, as Gordon Chang raised, that the CCP is building DNA and race-specific biological weapons. That's why he calls them China's civilization killers. And so what that refers to is biological weapons, viruses that are tailored to wipe out select races. So you could have a biological weapon that would only kill white people, a biological weapon that would only spare Chinese people. And that was the issue that Gordon Chang was raising. I asked him, well, what is his source on it? He says the CCP talks about it openly. Like, this isn't even a secret. It's crazy. It's crazy we let them do this. And we do let them do it. On the point of the idea of biological weapon against the United States, the idea that they would depopulate America, Frank, I'm sure you remember during the Cold War, that was a big discussion. The big narrative during the Cold War was that the Soviets and the Chinese Communist Party were planning to weaponize airstreams. They were wanting to use Arctic airstreams as carriers for biological weapons. And the plan, and I mean, again, there were rumors on it, but I think it was pretty solid. The plan, according to them, was to wipe out Canada, wipe out the United States, depopulate us. Russia would get Canada, Alaska, and I believe Maine. China would get the lower 48 states, and that was kind of the way it was divvied up, according to information coming out during the Cold War. The frightening thing we're seeing now is they may not have to do that. You don't have to weaponize an airstream. You don't need to do crazy experiments like this. You can start up a random Chinese laboratory. You can get government money kickbacks for it because you can sell counterfeit test kits or whatever like that, and you even get government money from it. And you can spread these across the United States with almost no oversight and do the same thing. In terms of the biological weapons treaties, I mean, I'm sorry, I know some people care about this stuff, but it's kind of a joke. China is a signatory in the biological weapons agreements, right, to not develop bioweapons. Even after signing that, they never acknowledged even having the biological weapons we knew that they had at the time. They never showed any signs of destroying them. And the big elephant in the room, as Dr. Malone was noting, is this. Effectively, biological weapons programs are effectively the same as vaccine research programs or medical programs. They are literally the same thing. And so while countries may claim we don't have biological weapons programs, just about everyone does. And the reason everyone does is because if you're doing gain of function research, if you're doing, vaccine development, meaning you're developing vaccines for possible future diseases, meaning you're creating new diseases capable of infecting humans, it's the same thing you would be doing to develop biological weapons. Now, in terms of the Reedley lab in California and the Las Vegas lab that was just found, I actually did another documentary investigating the Reedley lab. I went on the ground there. I went to the lab. I spoke with the fire inspector who first discovered it. I spoke to local officials. So, I mean, I was on the ground at that laboratory, and the findings were shocking. Local officials told me that this is what happened. Someone called in a complaint. They believed something weird was going on in this building. The laboratory in Reedley, it was a windowless building in the back of a recycling center. And this recycling center and building used to be like a food processing thing, or a food storage thing for a railway that used to run through there. The remnants of the rail are still there. And where the lab was is where the refrigerator used to be. Someone at the, I don't know, someone let them basically move in and set this whole laboratory up. Fire inspector goes there, does a circle around the building, finds someone drilled a hole into the wall and put a hose through. And she goes, normally that's a sign that maybe homeless people are living there. She goes and knocks on the door, and she told this to me personally, by the way. I did an on-the-ground investigation at the lab, what the remnants of it, with her, talking about this. Someone answered the door in full, looking like biological warfare garb, as she asked him what the heck is going on. And they told her, we're doing vaccine research, basically. They let her in. A stench hit her, horrible smell. It turned out it was the mice, because the mice were so badly kept that they were cannibalizing each other. They had these mice in cages stacked on top of each other with 24-hour lights on them, and the mice had lost their minds. The mice had gone insane, and they were skinning each other alive, rotting in their cages. We don't know what they were doing with the mice. They claim that part of that was developing COVID test kits, because what you do is you infect them with COVID, you take an element out of their bodies and you put it on the test kit, and that's how you sell them. But we find out later they're accused of not even doing that. They were buying test kits from China and then selling them as counterfeits on the internet. And so that raised questions as well of, well, if you guys were not developing COVID test kits, what were the mice for? What was that, a cover? We don't know. As Dr. Lin noted, the other problem we have is there are basically no real regulations or oversight on labs like this. And that's the problem you also had in Reedley. It was the reason the CDC hung up on the local officials when they tried to call for help, because this was the concern. After Jesse Ju, his American name is Jesse, after Jesse Ju was arrested, the local officials were dealing with a situation where they had bad wiring. The electrical fixtures were very badly wired. The fire inspector warned there could be an electrical fire any day. They were worried if they had a brownout or a shortage, if the refrigerators shut off, that they might have, who knows, maybe these refrigerators and freezers would unfreeze and you'd have a virus incident of some kind. They were really concerned about that. CDC hung up the phone and wouldn't even talk to them. They never investigated. They never even tested the virals. What ended up having to happen is local officials had to use local taxpayer budget, which is not, they don't have a lot of money in that area. It's a very poor area. They had to use taxpayer budget to hire a laboratory disposal company to come in and destroy everything. We never got answers on it. Part of the concern that was raised, if you have unlabeled vials or badly labeled, because some of these were handwritten labels, some of them, like with the Ebola thing, there were these silver bags, that is what you would have something like that in, but they were not labeled. There was a piece of paper in the refrigerator with them that said Ebola. That's where the Ebola thing comes from. They were never tested. They were destroyed before they were tested. Other vials, we have no idea what they were because they were never tested. They had numerical labels, and reference sheets, some of them were labeled by hand in Chinese. We have no idea what was there. That's the hard fact of it. And we'll never know because it was all destroyed. It was all destroyed. And that raises some other questions too. Dr. Lin, I actually spoke with him when I did the feature on the laboratory when I was there. And what he was telling me is that the Chinese Communist Party was actually encouraging Chinese citizens to do dangerous and risky virus experiments. This was actually something that you could get government money from in China. I don't know if these guys were getting CCP money, but it is something the CCP was financing. They were encouraging it. And, frankly, what does a biological warfare attack look like? Does it look like a military weaponizing an airstream? Or does it look like some backwoods, back of a house laboratory having a freezer unfreeze and causing a biological incident? You tell me. And then how do you even blame it on them at that point? It is deeply concerning. The other fact is, as Sean Lin noted, again, there are not really strong regulations in the United States on private laboratories. So it is possible an irresponsible person could register a laboratory. When you do that, you can buy live viruses. You can buy humanized mice. They're kind of expensive. They're not that expensive. I believe you can buy them for like $7 to $10 each. And in fact, Jesse Jew is even suing Reedley for destroying his mice, by the way, for the cost of it. You can buy them relatively cheap. I mean, not it's going to be a lot if you buy a ton of them, but there's basically nothing keeping track of this. There's no federal level oversight really on any of this. And the scary part is we now find this guy had other facilities. Now the other scary part is we knew this. In fact, when I was interviewing officials in Reedley and when I was investigating Jesse Jew, we were finding he was tied in with the Chinese Communist Party's United Front. Not just him, but his associates, right? As Sean Lin noted, like his attorneys and so on like that, other people tied in with his network, tied in with the corporate board and stuff like that. He had ties in with the Rose Pak Foundation, through extensions. The Rose Pak used to be called the Kingmaker of San Francisco. You could not get into politics without the backing of Rose Pak, and she was a known Chinese Communist Party agent. The Tong related to her was tied in with this. As Sean Lin noted, you have these little red schools, basically Confucius. They're similar to Confucius Institutes, but for lower grades, operating in Las Vegas and Nevada, tied in with this. And as we found out, even other virus laboratories, just like this one, tied in with it. Now, I have high hopes in terms of, or at least faith, tied in with what they just found in Las Vegas, because it seems things are different this time. Authorities did take the vials. To me, that is a hopeful sign, because to me that means if they're going to take vials from a laboratory like this, they're probably not going to throw it in the evidence room and leave it to rot because it's a potential danger. My assumption is they will test it and we'll finally, hopefully, get answers. And that's been my ongoing concern, is that you have the CCP on one end basically funding this type of stuff. I don't know about this lab, but they do fund dangerous and risky virus research. This is part of their public thing right now. We know in their own military writings, they're building biometric weapons targeted even at specific races. We do know they've been collecting biometric data and DNA data and everything else for that purpose. They're not even hiding it. They literally write it publicly. And then we find that CCP-tied individuals are doing experiments that look like it. And, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, gee, this should be a pretty big concern for all of us. And so, hopefully we'll get some answers on what just happened in Las Vegas and how it ties into this.
Josh, thank you. This is an incredibly rich report and obviously an ongoing investigation by you. And we're so grateful to you and Epic TV and Epic Times for mounting it, especially as we've now heard from several of our presenters, in the face of, at least until recently, the abject studied disinterest, I guess one might call it, of the U.S. enforcement officials in this space. Even more troubling is what you've just revealed, which is that this is a largely unregulated activity, whether it's Americans or whether it's Chinese or others. This would seem to scream out for corrective action and close monitoring as well as regulation. And needless to say, none of it should be done by Chinese nationals in this country, especially surreptitiously, covertly. We have two of you with us, Dr. Lin and Josh Phillip. Let me just ask a couple of questions here quickly. And back to this issue of bioengineering these kinds of viruses for the purpose of killing specific populations and ethnicities, races, what have you. How much can we discern from what the Chinese are acknowledging about their interest in this and their work on it? Are they close to having an operational capability in this space, or not, or do we simply not know, despite our experience inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology over COVID-19?
Well, briefly on that, we don't really know. The unfortunate thing we do know is that biological weapons research does look like virus research. It's effectively the same thing.
Right.
And they overlap. It's a dual use technology, you could call it. We unfortunately still allow Chinese scientists to even work on taxpayer funded medical programs in the United States. We still do that. We still there are other countries that cooperate them with the P4 laboratories, but they still do that. In the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab, after what I think we all believe was the outbreak there from COVID-19, they deployed the Chinese Communist Party's biological weapons department to go and check it out. The military was there.
The bat lady.
And if there was nothing there, then why did they deploy their biological weapons division of their military there? We've been fed a big fat picture of smoke and mirrors, and they're leading us on. They're not letting us investigate. They're not giving us answers. And it raises questions on why we're still working with them. Now, in terms of bioweapons, this is the other reality. When we talk about destructive warfare, we often talk about nuclear. The problem with nuclear is mutually assured destruction. The benefit of bioweapons is plausible deniability. The devastation is basically the same, but you're not going to risk retaliation because you have plausible deniability. COVID-19 could have been a bioweapon for all we know. And again, nobody was launching attacks on China. I think it was, personally.
But Josh, this goes back to something that Dr. Malone mentioned, and that is this idea that we are giving essentially a pass to the Chinese on having a biological warfare program, let alone what has been done to us. 1 million dead and countless millions others harmed, our economy devastated, and so on. Presumably, when the decision was made by Xi Jinping and company to move COVID-19 here, and that was done by allowing people to travel from Wuhan internationally, including to visit their friends and family in the United States, when they weren't allowed to move around at all in China for a good reason. Let me come to you, if I can, Sean Lin, the same question, and I know you've been trying to track what the Chinese are up to closely. Is there any way of knowing how close to having ethnically, racially targeted bioweapons?
It is pretty hard because these kind of study will not be published. And so it's their own internal operations. But I do believe with the AI age is coming so fast, and the CCP's capability of developing ethnic-specific bioweapons will be much closer than ever before. And CCP has collected a lot of information on bioinformatic data from those many diagnostic tests. Maybe the test was performed in many other countries, but the data was analyzed in China. So they collect a lot of information. So that's a problem because, earlier we discussed about shipping the samples to China for analysis, but just getting the data is a lot more easier for communist operations. So in this way, they are much faster. They collect so much data. They can analyze different ethnic profiles very, very fast. And also, they definitely funded high-risk studies. So one of the universities in Beijing University of Chemical Engineering, they even set up a special college, actually in a University of Chemical Engineering, they set up a biolab. And on their website, it specifically emphasizing we do conduct high-risk studies. Yeah. So, and that was part of the military civil fusion program the Chinese government supported. So they are aggressive in doing different dangerous studies, and also talk about the deniability that Joshua just mentioned. Now CCP is actually exporting these kind of operations to many Southeast Asia countries, and so they can conduct many dangerous experiments in other countries now, like in Cambodia, and so it's even harder for the world to find out where the next leak or next intentional release will be. You know, Chinese government can say this is nothing related to China because the outbreak started maybe in Cambodia, maybe in India, and they actually have people very aggressively collecting dangerous pathogen samples in Southeast Asia as well. And also by another dangerous aspect is that by many of the joint construction project in the Southeast Asia, like a superhighway connecting Cambodia to China. So many of the forest was actually taken down. So many of the dangerous animals, pathogens were released into the, have higher chance to be released into the society, because many of these things in the past it was in the wild jungles, but now they have bigger opportunity to have a potential exposure in the human society as well. So many new viruses can be identified, and the Chinese government can collect these samples. And then there are other people who, serving the communist parties, like Peter Daszak. He has team still actively working in Southeast Asia, collecting dangerous Nipah virus samples. And then some of the samples were shipping to China for analysis. And the Chinese government also relocating some of their top experts, like Shi Zhengli from Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now he's in Guangzhou, and the Harvard professor Charles Lieber, who was sentenced in the United States after he finished his service in the United States. Now he also landed in Guangdong province. So many of these people are still supporting China's very aggressive bioengineering projects. And so nowadays, another big alarm is the Chinese government treating the whole Chinese population as a huge pool for clinical trials. So the number of clinical trials in China has skyrocketed in the last few years. And the number of clinical trial number almost surpassed United States now. And they have, all the AI tool to do all kinds of new drug designs. So this is, of course, a very convenient excuse to do additional bioweapon design and research.
There is another facet to this, and you sort of touched on it. The World Health Organization, which has been aggressively promoting something called the pathogen access and benefit system as a feature of its new pandemic treaty. It seems, and lots of experts that we've talked to about this agree, that it's a means of greatly exacerbating the problem of the proliferation of biological warfare techniques and technology and know-how and the pathogens themselves. Do you agree that that's a problem and might mean that we are not going to be worrying about China predominantly for much longer if lots of other bad actors, subnational bad actors as well, is a point that Dr. Malone made in our interview with him. It's an old paradigm that you're going to control all of this because nations will stand up to ensure that there is regulation and controls and perhaps a total cessation of such activities. Not when you're rewarding people for finding pathogens and telling them to send all of the information about the exotic things that they come across in their caves or swamps or wherever, so that they're shared universally around the world, a kind of right we're told, under this PABS system, as it's known, in the pandemic treaty. Your thoughts about that, sir?
It definitely creates even bigger dangers for the bad actors to gain access to these dangerous pathogens much faster than other research institutes. So WHO's role in the name of enhanced global surveillance of infectious disease, you allow many of these countries to so-called set up their own surveillance capabilities. So in these ways, some of the fundings go into these countries, but the capacities building take time. The experts in handling those pathogens take times. So many countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, were not able to really handle this kind of lab. So who really going into these sites to collect samples, to analyze samples, or even do some study? So usually are those people who already in the paradigms, who already in the last 20 years doing so-called analysis or surveillance on pandemic potential pathogens. So those are Anthony Fauci's original cohorts ideas. And so, so of course, Chinese governments already established a large volume of, you can say, excellent virologists, microbiologists, and they are actually at the frontier right now in terms of their expertise. So they can export their expertise, they can export their own mechanisms to many different countries in these WHO programs, and then help collect the samples, and they are much faster in doing analysis. They can publish paper much faster. So of course, these are the countries who will be happy to collaborate with Chinese virologists, microbiologists. So in this way, the Chinese government will get more information much faster than many other countries. So it's basically enabling the Chinese Communist Party in the faster building up biological weapons.
This is the profound concern that I have too. Josh, let me just ask you about two things, if I may, and we'll probably wrap with this. One is, as I mentioned early in the program, of particular concern to me is the presence inside the United States of, well, I've heard estimates anywhere from 10,000 to 200,000 Chinese soldiers who could well have, as part of their mission set, taking the kinds of pathogens that are in the two facilities that we've explored so far, and taking your point that the destruction of the evidence, and by the way, not in the most safe way, as I recall, we had contractors in shirt sleeves disposing of some of these dangerous pathogens in the case of Reedley, but we're anxiously awaiting to hear what they find. The investigations will turn up in terms of this Las Vegas site. But should we be particularly worried that in addition to some number, maybe as many as 18 other biolabs are still out there, might be visited by these soldiers with a view to spreading around these incredibly dangerous pathogens, and in the process lay waste to much of our population? That's question one. Question two, just quickly, there's a lot of talk at the moment, as you know, about getting the Chinese into arms control agreements. As I think you mentioned, the Chinese are, of course, parties to the Biological Warfare Convention. But for all the reasons that have been mentioned, it's completely unverifiable. And the idea of strengthening it to make it more verifiable, or at least providing sort of early warning, seems to be a bit of a fool's errand. I'd be interested in your thoughts about whether, first of all, we're just, given what the Chinese record has been, unlikely to see them conforming scrupulously, honorably, reliably with whatever agreements they sign. The inherent shortcomings of whatever the document might be in the first place, which might make it impossible to tell that they're not adhering to it.
So on the point of the arms control agreements, I mean, of course, this is how we try to operate diplomatically with any kind of deal around the world. The reality we've had with the Chinese Communist Party, that we've seen them do with us and with every other country, is they never follow their agreements. call it the China model, right? This is the CCP model. So the CCP will sign an agreement, maybe abide by it sometimes for maybe a year or 2 years, or maybe wait out an administration, then violate it. They know that auditing is going to take 4, 8 years if we even push it, which we often do not. And they'll be given free rein to violate it all they want until they get to negotiate maybe another deal 8, 12 years, 16 years down the line. And then even then, they'll just sign it and violate it. This has been our experience over and over and over again, and I would hope that we'd finally learn our lesson. It's how they've always operated. The CCP, right. It's how they've always operated. On your other point about the Chinese soldiers, so I actually did on the ground investigations into the migrant crisis. I went down to Panama. I went to the Darien Gap. I went across the U.S.-Mexico border into Mexico on the U.S. side. On the U.S. side in particular, I did find many, many, many Chinese migrants. I ran to a few down in Panama in some of the migrant camps there. And I mean, again, were those intentional or not? I have no idea. What I can say is some of the checkpoints where they were dropping people off at, I did run into people who I suspected were Chinese mafia or Chinese agents. And as we know, the Chinese mafia is tied in with the the triads, right? They often operate beneath the Tongs, Tongs, and the Tongs tend to be part of the United Front. So the CCP has a very broad nexus of what we would call war fighters, spies, soldiers, and this does tie into the United Front Work Department, right? Yes. As are the Chinese secret police stations, right? Those ran under the the Ministry of Public Security, the MPS, MSS, Ministry of State Security also operates a lot of their, Operation Fox and through these networks. These are like the nexus of Chinese spy operations, Chinese military operations, Chinese information operations, Chinese blackmail and bribery. They all run through the United Front. What do we know about the United Front? Effectively, this is a large-scale network of Chinese associations throughout the United States. I saw Jamestown Foundation just did a very big report on it. I believe they documented just recently, like the other day, 2,000 Tongs tied in with the United Front or organizations. Mm. Now, I know in my own research, because I've been looking into this since 2008, this has been a lifelong investigative project of mine. Some of these Tongs, and they're everywhere. They're in the U.S., they're in Canada, they're in Latin America, they're in all throughout Europe, they're in all of Asia, they're everywhere. I know some of them claim to have tens of thousands of members. And if you understand that maybe not every one of those is going to be a war fighter on the streets, every one of those can be tapped by the CCP for one purpose or another, whether it's information theft, whether it's IP theft, whether it's, hey, study this topic and go back to China, or, hey, study this topic and get a job in the CIA so we can use you as an insider. They use this to infiltrate government. It's tied in with other operations, including the Confucius Institutes. The Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, the CSSAs, are a huge threat to America that you almost never see get talked about. But that's tied in with the United Front, paid for, operated by the Chinese consulates, tied in with the Tong networks. And that's where the CCP plants spies, even within select roles within maybe universities or military or government agencies. Yes. It's huge. It's massive. And I will note, even the Reedley lab had ties to the United Front. And so absolutely it's tied in with it. And so if I were to give recommendations and raise my concerns with Chinese military or soldiers or warfare, please, the United States needs to do something about the United Front. The United Front is like the core of all these operations. It's an easy way to do it if you want to go after them, but nothing has been done about it. This needs to be the focus.
Josh, thank you. I couldn't agree more with that, and it's part of our work program is to return to focus that we've given off and on to the United Front Work Department and its role in elite capture, among other things, and suborning and subversive operations, some of which could, as in this case, really be truly genocidal on an epic scale. One of you made the point that we know that the kinds of effects on a country of an attack with thermonuclear weapons and an attack with biological weapons would be similar. I would qualify that by simply saying that the biological weapons have the advantage, if you're interested in colonizing the United States, of not destroying a lot of the infrastructure in the process of creating the openings for taking it over. Something they can't say of thermonuclear weapons. They generally make a mess of things. Quite a long-standing mess at that, in many cases. I think this has been a fascinating, if deeply troubling conversation, and I so appreciate all of those of you who have participated in it. The writings of Sam Faddis, the insights of Sean Lin, and those of Jim Fennell and Gordon Chang, Robert Malone, and Joshua Phillips are so important, and it's hard to overstate, really, given this seeming combination now of the infrastructure that is being laid for biological warfare attacks in this country. And by the way, one of the things that has been noted about the proximity of these labs to some of these military facilities, at least in the two cases we've ascertained, have operated for some time in the United States, is biological weapons are most predictably effective, as I understand it, when they're fresh. So if you're creating a batch for the express purpose of attacking a target 30 miles up the road, that can greatly improve the prospects that you'll have predictable and very lethal effects. This and so many other points warrant further examination. We will be doing that in the days to come. I want in particular to promote an upcoming conversation. We haven't quite gotten it scheduled yet. I'm hoping it will be next week with Peter Schweitzer, the author of an incredibly important new book, The Invisible Coup. 4 other New York Times best-selling books to his credit, but this one may be his finest work because it really lays out how we have been gamed by enemies of this country, foreign and domestic, and the extent to which, as a result, vulnerabilities like the one we've been discussing today have been enabled. And I would simply say that as you look at the presence in our country of large numbers of Chinese nationals, at least some of whom are believed to be military personnel of fighting age, this adds urgency to something that I've talked about on this program and our television show frequently, and that is the imperative need, it seems to me, of letting the American people in on what we're up against here. Not to scare them, but to equip them to help with the solution. And I think that solution starts with a kind of situational awareness at the civilization level, I guess one might say, but a situational awareness about the presence of Chinese personnel who could be tasked with, as Deng Xiaoping reportedly specifically commissioned, the People's Liberation Army's biowarfare program to be prepared to depopulate the United States so that it could be colonized by China. If the American people are crowdsourcing that situational awareness, helping law enforcement, helping the intelligence community, helping the military, become aware of problems that as we've talked about in these 2 facilities, it seems as though we've lucked out. But what will it take to find the others and to shut them down? And how fast can it be done? And what a priority must be assigned to it? Because these are truly, as I said earlier, the worst of the worst. And the damage that they could do to us so far surpasses that gangbangers and drug cartels and other ne'er-do-wells now in the country also could do left to their own devices. So with that, let's say thank you to all hands again. Thank you most especially to those of you in our audience. I pray that, as always, you will take this information and bring it to the attention of particularly people who represent you in government. They have a need to know just as you do, but they have a responsibility to act as well, and they must take steps to correct this yawning vulnerability of biological warfare at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and their friends before this horror, this genocidal catastrophe is inflicted upon us. With that, God bless you all. God bless America. And please, God, keep her safe. Over and out.